Hey, Stephen, thanks for joining us today. As a way of getting started, give us a little background on yourself.
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity, Brian. So my background is many moons ago. I joined the military in the UK, which was fantastic because it gave me a sense of purpose and a drive that I've been able to utilize throughout the career. After coming out of the military, I joined some tech companies, but it was more on a pre-sales role rather than sales initially. Um, Dates back a while to the dot-com boom. Um, and one of the things that I found in the pre-sales role was that I worked with some good salespeople and some not so good salespeople.
Come on.
And I know, shock, eh? And one of the things I found was I couldn't believe, bearing in mind it was the dot-com and money was being thrown around left, right, and center. Some of the salespeople that I worked with would go into these meetings and they would just talk at the prospect, never ask any question, never ask them what their pain points were, and then would be surprised when the meeting ended and there was no follow-up. And over probably an 18-month window, I thought, this makes no sense. I think I could do a better job than this.
Yeah.
And so that's what really drove me to make a change from pre-sales to sales. And I know that's probably not uncommon. And from that point, got into the software sales, found out I could actually do it, grew from there, and then probably about 13 years ago had excuse me, had the opportunity to move across to the US. And so I made that move 13 years ago and have worked in the US since, primarily in that sales role. But one of the passions that I found during that time is also helping people starting out in sales and passing on some of that knowledge and getting some of that knowledge transfer.
Well, let's go back to those good salespeople versus bad salespeople, because I think talking about those distinctions is where we learn. Because that rep who was talking through the whole meeting thought they were, what, in control of the sales call, right? That they were
Yeah,
driving the process.
exactly. 100%. Now, having a good salesperson I worked with very early on in my career, she was actually a lady at a time when there weren't as many ladies in the sales space. And she was great because she was personable. And she gave me one thing. She said, if there's one thing I want you to learn is people buy from people. And that's something that's just stuck with me throughout my career. And in terms of as helping others out, is it's all about those connections and the people.
And
Uh,
yet leadership forgets about that, don't they? They 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 kind of don't want to. I think they know it, but they don't want to know it.
Absolutely, it's all about the numbers and the metrics.
Right. That,
And
that the people don't matter.
yeah, but without the people, there is no
There's
sale.
no number or metrics to count.
Yeah, you can put up on your QBR a great slide that says, "Oh, there were 1,000 calls and we got 10 meet," all meaningless unless there's a connection with your prospect and you're solving a problem for that prospect.
Now, when you were new in the pre-sales role, how did you know what good selling was? And was it just looking at the reaction of the customers and the outcome, or
Yeah, that's part of it. And part of it was I'd sit there in the meetings and think, if I was on the other side of the table, I'd be thinking, who is this person? And they haven't seen once asked me, what's your
what I
biggest
care
pain
about?
point right now?
Yeah.
So some of it was gut feel and some of it was putting myself in the position of the person on the other side of the table.
And how do you think people get so far in their career being so tone deaf with what works and what doesn't work?
Great question. And I think some of it is in many instances, it's jumping from role to role to role. And,
Yeah.
a tenure, sort of a year, 18 months, 2 years, move on to the next one and get another 2 years, which is fine. But the beauty of this position, being able to sell, is to build that rapport with customers and to understand their problems and present solutions, not products, but solutions that help them get their outcomes. Because once you've got them like that, and as a trusted advisor, the world's your oyster. And
Yeah.
the upsell opportunities are huge and much easier to get than a brand new logo sale. And so the rest, it all comes back to people again.
And people buy from people. What does that mean to you? Or because I think that's like one of those things in life that sounds obvious, but the more you think about it, the more it expands.
Absolutely. For me, the people buy from people is the person on the other side of the table has got to trust you. They've got to believe in you and almost feel like we feel their pain and we've helped others solve that pain. So we can be trusted. And that doesn't come down to product features and functions.
No, it doesn't,
It's
does
about outcomes.
it? Yeah. And what have you seen work to build up that trust?
Well, that another saying in terms of problem shared is a problem halved. All you have to do is ask some very basic questions because people are all too ready to unburden about the challenges and the issues they've got and really listen and listen to what they're saying, and then be able to play that back to them. And they don't even realize that you're actually playing back what they've told you.
No, I don't.
Um, but that then gives them like, oh, you understand our pain and you've given us a potential solution to resolve that pain. I think that's super important. It goes without saying, and it's said all the time, that active listening. Um, let let your customer talk, let them share their pain, and then you can give them the solution, and that helps to build that trust. That's
And,
certainly been my experiences.
and I think that pre-sales role really helps people develop those skills for the sales role.
I couldn't agree more because what I've seen again with many different salespeople over the years is you have the salespeople that the customer wants to try and keep at arm's length because they're seen as snake oil salesman type
They don't see
approach.
value.
Exactly, exactly. 100% that.
Right.
You've got to have value to be able to build that rapport.
And this is what
And
salespeople don't get. They think it's because this pre-sales person has the technical knowledge, but that's value. What
exactly,
what knowledge are you bringing other than the price
exactly,
and the
exactly the
models?
case. Yeah. And that's why there's an interesting dynamic typically between the salesperson and the pre-sales, and the salesperson thinking a pre-salesperson is treading on their turf. It's a collaborative sale,
Yes.
and if the salesperson can't add the value, they can at least manage the relationship and bring in the right people that do deliver the value from the client perspective.
And what was that transition like for you personally, going from pre-sales to sales?
It was fun.
It was?
Oh, it was, yeah. Um, because it was at the time it was a pretty low bar to get across.
260.
So
Expectations were pretty low.
yeah, exactly. So it wasn't like this is like a monumental
I
shift and
keep
oh goodness.
expectations low.
um, and but it was great fun because on the pre-sale side you can become constrained because you've got a certain box. On the sales side, knock yourself out, go and
Sure.
try things. And so I really enjoyed that, and meeting all the different types of personality and people. And just like riding a bike, when you start off, you're going to fall off, you're going to hurt yourself, you pick yourself back up. But again, success, it's going to sound ridiculous. Success is easy. When you're successful, everything's a breeze. What you actually learn most from is the failures,
Yeah.
and the learning from that, so long as you can incorporate that, means your successes should be more than the failures. So I think learning from failure and not beating people up on failure is a good thing. Now, if they keep repeating the same mistakes, that's a different story. But to encourage people to learn from the mistakes and then to see that growth is a very satisfying feeling.
How about learning the business sale of the sale? Not just the technical sale that you were really good and
Yeah.
comfortable with, but how to get the paper through the mirage or the
Yeah,
gauntlet.
absolutely. And honestly, with most of the accounts I've worked with throughout my career, I don't know that there was any one single path to success for that because it varied. Now, obviously, in the larger enterprises, there's a process and you have to follow that process and you have to rely on the people that you're working with to outline what that process is in order to be able to feed that back in and adhere to that process. Um, Certainly, what I found is that, and again, on the enterprise sales, quite often you may not even get access to the people that are going to be doing the final sign off.
Oh,
So it's all about bringing all the stakeholders that you can and getting their buy-in and understanding, because they all have different pain points, which is why the sales cycle can be longer, because you've got to herd those cats together. And so getting those folks on side, and actually enabling them to have the right conversations internally can expedite the process, because many clients say, well, we have to go to RFP, which you don't want to happen, obviously, um, typically. And by working with the stakeholders and coming up with a compelling proposition means in many instances, we didn't have to um, have an RFP process. They were able to single source it based on the
yeah.
justification. So I think it'd be lovely if there was a single answer to it all, but I think it's very much understanding what that client's position is.
Yeah, because a lot of people don't understand that process at all. And as soon as procurement hears it, they think RFI, RFP, fill the file.
Yeah.
Lots of meetings.
Oh yeah.
Let's muddy
And
this water up.
absolutely. And the experience, and again, this has been rather educational over the years, is I've worked with people that get very excited when they do receive an RFP. And it's like, oh, great, they know us. We must be doing something right. And it's
That's what
like,
Steven's been up to.
but it's more than that, because it's like, have you been speaking with this customer in the last few months? No. So what do you think's happened?
They just
Well, they know we're
woke up
great.
and started typing.
It's like, yeah, don't respond to that RFP unless there's a real disruption that we can bring to bear, because it's been written by someone else and
Yes.
they're just giving, like, here's the four other vendors you should go out and talk to, but here's all the key things we do that they can't do, or etc.
Yeah. And have you found the sole source justification to work at some enterprises or?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Even at places like the US Army for multi-million dollar deals.
Well, there it's common because the army, not everybody, they don't buy Walmart
Yeah.
stuff. They buy their army stuff.
Yeah.
But like big companies, I don't see it that often. Maybe it's I don't try it that often. I don't know.
Yeah. I'd say typically not had to do that many RFPs.
Yeah.
So they have been able to get enough business. It's all about deriving the business value and why they need to go with us, what it's going to mean for the organization, and the savings it's going to bring. Um, and that has seemed to work both in not just the sort of defense or government, but also in the private sector as well. Another way that we've been able to get around, or have been able to get around those issues of the RFPs, is almost like a land and expand
Yeah.
mentality as well. Start small,
Well, yeah.
get your beachhead,
Yes.
work it, and then the upsells come. And that's because you're an existing vendor. It doesn't always have to go out to
It's
RFP.
so easy. And what I'm finding is reps aren't creating that problem. Customers are creating that problem. They all want to do something big and it sounds
Yeah,
exciting and they end up doing nothing most of the time.
100% paralysis by analysis
Yeah.
all the time.
And the smart vendor goes, let's start a quick start. Let's get
Yeah,
something in here. And then 6 months later is $1 million deal.
absolutely. And that's worked, for example, for very large US utilities, which can be an enormous
Enormous.
sales
Yes.
cycle.
They're regulated.
Yeah.
What would you say is your strongest selling characteristic?
Putting myself in the mind of the buyer.
Yeah.
So although I'm representing the company, I'm always thinking I'm on the other side of the table, building that rapport and being able, and this is where the pre-sales background does help, being able to almost listen to what they're saying and say, so if you were to do X, Y, and Z and it delivered this, would that be a good outcome for you? And they're like, oh, we hadn't thought about that, even though they may have already inadvertently said it when they were sharing their pain points. So that listening, being adaptive to the situation, and being able to deliver solutions or outline solutions as part of that process really helps with the mind share.
Because what you mentioned, putting yourself in their place, how would you characterize that? Is it empathy? Is it compassion? Is it,
All of the above. So
it's a,
there's certainly the empathy
yeah,
and compassion. I feel your pain. We all, because people want that pain to be shared because then it's less pain for them. They can share
that's
that
half the
burden.
thing, right? Yeah. Getting off your
Yeah,
chest.
yeah, absolutely. Um, but but also looking for ways to make them look smart inside the organization. Because quite often, some of the stakeholders that you may be talking to may own the problem, but may not necessarily have own the budget.
Yeah.
And so giving them the ammunition to go back in and sell that internally to people that we may not ever see,
Yeah.
and to build that up, that's certainly really important.
Yeah. Because if you don't put yourself in their place, what are you naturally going to talk about? The
Yeah,
product, right? What you know.
product. Yeah,
But if you put
yeah,
yourself in their place, you become curious about what they're facing, what they're going through.
yeah. And I think that's a perfect thing. It's the curiosity. The curiosity is key. The successful salespeople I've worked with all know and have been curious. They've been curious to find out more. They're curious because at the end of the day, there's nothing more compelling than stories. And stories drive everything and have done since the Persian times. So product features and functions, not so much.
Right.
But
It
the
doesn't.
stories and those outcomes really resonate with people that are having the same kind of issues.
Yeah. And what have you seen the very best salespeople do?
They have been very good at not just managing that early stage of the sales cycle process, but also the perhaps the harder part, which is getting a deal across the line and
It is.
working through the process
Yeah. Because you're
and
talking big deals in your
expediting.
space, right? Six
Yeah,
figures, seven-figure deals.
yeah, absolutely.
And
So they've been, sorry.
how do you justify them?
So again, a lot of this can come from the land and expand. So
Yeah.
essentially, almost like a paid pilot proof of concept. But typically, if you do it for free, yeah, where's
Faster.
the stickiness?
Right.
It might take slightly longer
Yes.
to get a paid assessment or pilot, but there's skin in the game, and
True.
so you can work with that. Um, so depending on whether you're a product vendor or an SI, maybe it's a slightly different beast. Product vendors, typically people are going to expect it for free, unless it's a big, long 90-day pilot program. But irrespective of whether it's free or paid, the outcomes from that exercise can help drive the business case and the real numbers that can be extrapolated across the organization to say, this is why you need to proceed with us.
Yeah.
Without those numbers, it's a nice to have.
Right. And what type of numbers are they looking for? Is it return on investment? Is it risk mitigation? Is it profit? Is it?
So typically, certainly in the spaces that I've worked in, it has been much more around there's many pain points in the organization, hence why it's a larger deal size, takes slightly longer, but there is a risk management perspective. There's the, particularly with privacy regulations, for example,
Yeah,
being in compliance with those, being better prepared for if or when there's a cyber breach incident and what type of data is out there in the domain. You want to lock that down before it gets out there,
yeah,
because then it's too late. There's also efficiency improvements within the organization to be able to do things quicker, more effectively with the most current information. And certainly almost a concept of monetization. It doesn't necessarily mean selling their data to other people, but again, those efficiency and productivity improvements, being able to get arms around all of that data. It can be intangible, but it contributes to that bottom line of the business.
yeah. And how did you develop your skills about either negotiating or selling to executives? Because as a pre-sales person, you show the product and you answer questions, it's safe.
Yeah. The honest answer is trial and error.
Which is the truth. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
it must have been hard because I went through it. It's really hard.
Yeah. Yeah. That was the biggest adjustment, and learning when to say no during that negotiation period, because you can't always say yes.
Right. Because it will never end.
Yeah. And one of the common themes I've seen in my career is people said, well, let's offer a discount or a discount to get it closed by this date. And it's like, why? That's
Is
artificial.
that the issue?
Yeah. And it's never actually the issue. And once you've put that out on the table, it doesn't matter if that date has expired, they expect that same
Of
price.
course. No one forgets.
Yeah. So that whole trying to think of the negotiations on the sale are very different from the negotiations to get to that point of being in a position to negotiate the final deal. So you've got to be a bit of a chameleon in that regards.
And what do you typically compete against? Is it doing nothing? Is it delay? Is it do something in-house or some hokey thing?
Yeah, I'd say by far and away, irrespective of the industry I've been in, the biggest blocker is this is too difficult to even contemplate. We're going to
So we won't.
do nothing. Yeah, we're going to do nothing. We're going to kick it into the long grass and maybe revisit it some other time when we think we got more time. I'd say that is the number one,
Yeah,
really is the number one. And again, with the big enterprise deals, they are complex, both internally and externally. And so it can be very, very daunting. And part of our role is to try and make that less daunting and
yeah.
to be flexible and adaptive so that that outcome of doing nothing, to try and prevent it as much as possible.
And what do you get them focused on? Is it land and expand, or is it a particular catastrophe, which I'm sure is in the news once a month, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Depending on the industry, the land and expand is a great thing because a lot of people are conservative by nature because they don't want to make a decision that's a career ending decision for them. And so, again, taking them on the journey from that landing point, demonstrating the value and growing means it de-risks it for them
Yeah,
as well.
as needed.
Yeah. And again, it's people. You've got to be cognizant of the fact that these people will be, some of these people will be very nervous about making a big decision that could backfire on them from a career perspective. Um, Other instances, if you can, it's great to get the big deal.
Sure.
Not always possible, but from being able to articulate outcomes from previous similar clients or get them talking with those clients about their experiences can sometimes lead us to get that larger sale without having to do the smaller bit. But I'd say that's the exception rather than the rule.
And Where's the champion typically fit in the organization?
Wow. Uh,
Down in the hall at the very end.
quite often, yeah,
Yeah.
quite often, because particularly now, again, part of the adaptation is since COVID, how many people are in the office together at the same time? So being able to get all those people in a room and build that rapport in person is that much more challenging now. And so many things are remote, even when people are back in the office. So um, the champion is likely to be at a lower point in the organization to start with, but that's where we have to work with them to get the introduction to the more senior stakeholders
Yeah.
and so on, and just to bring people into that big tent as we can, because the C-suite super busy. Are they going to take a cold call? Well, maybe one or two will, but generally not.
Right. And you're talking about something that they don't understand, right?
Yeah,
And don't want to understand, which
absolutely.
is not a
Yeah.
great combination
Yep.
during a cold call.
No, and all they're likely to do, even if they entertain it, is say, "Go and speak with Jim down the hall. He sorts this out for me."
Yeah.
So it's all about getting the buy-in over that course of that duration of the cycle.
And I got to believe that that champion doesn't have the backing and a lot of times of the executives, where this is not on the top priority list, like AI
Yeah,
and big data and cloud or whatever else
yeah,
they're looking at that year.
yeah.
It's kind of like something we should be worried about, but who's worried about it?
Exactly. That's absolutely the case, and because it certainly with some of the industries I've worked in, it might be dealing with internal data. Well, that's perceived to be that's boring. That doesn't help us. Well, it does, but that's the perception.
And we don't
And
notice until it doesn't.
absolutely.
And
So
then,
yeah. So I also have experience of the cyber breach response space. And so that scare story, for want of a better term, is very compelling because, to your point, organizations truly care when there's an incident because you've got your reputational damage, you've got the individuals as well that are impacted, and that can have real long-term ramifications. So, as part of that sales cycle for why do something, being better prepared for that breach response becomes, I want to say, compelling. Sometimes it is, and sometimes people say, "Yeah, well, it's not going to happen to us."
well, when I sold security, I always tried to future pace them. And I'd
Mm.
say, well, let's say you ignore this and this payload comes in and it blows up your middle tier and your CEO found out that you passed on the protection because you unilaterally decided it was too expensive.
Yeah, yeah,
That usually got people's attention. But you had to say it a lot softer than that.
yeah, and probably not in front of others as well.
Right, because they think they're saving they're really lazy. They just don't want to do anything.
Yeah, yeah, that's it, and it's
And how did you develop the sense of when an account should go big or go land and expand? Did you develop a sense for that?
yeah. I'm a great believer on gut instinct,
Yeah.
whether in personal or business life. I found, yes, sometimes it's wrong, but more often than not, it's right. And so just by having those conversations with a prospect, part of that skill set as a salesperson is being able to have that intuition about one, when's the right time to ask for the close, but also what type of
What's
close? Is it going to
possible?
be small or big?
Yeah. Cool. Hey, Stephen, I really enjoyed this conversation. Where can people go to connect and follow you?
I have a LinkedIn profile under Stephen Matthews, and so feel free to reach out to me there.